Welcome to WTF Is Going On. I'm Omar,
I'm Jeremy.
and we're two dads, entrepreneurs, and former tech execs who wrote a best-selling book for job seekers who are here to help you understand WTF is going on so you can be a smarter friend, colleague, and partner. Each episode will give you the quick hits on an important but slightly under the radar topic, and not just tell you WTF is going on, but tell you WTF you can actually do about it, unlike most every other podcast. Our views and news you can use. So please go back and listen to our first episode if you haven't. It's all about WTF is going on and what you can do about disruptions to the job market due to AI. Jeremy, what are we talking about today?
I work with hundreds of universities around the world, and today we're going to dig into one of the spiciest topics out there. Is college still worth it? So help us tee this up here, Omar. What are you hearing out there in the zeitgeist? What are people saying about the value of higher ed here in 2025?
Yeah, so this is a loyalist critique, but we do want to understand and interrogate today WTF is going on with college in the year 2025. First, I need to start with the dad joke, Jeremy.
Of
All
course.
right.
Let's hear it.
All right. So, potential employer interviewing an employee. Okay. The employer says, hey, forget everything you learned in college. You won't need it working here. The potential employee says, hey, I never went to college. And the employer says, sorry, you're not qualified to work here.
Yes. I think this podcast is over. That pretty much sums it up. No,
That pretty much sums up
love
the
that.
state of things, right? Um, a
Very
lot of the
topical.
college, yeah, a lot of the inherent value of a college degree is a bit of a legacy, right? It's a bit of a legacy. It's a bit pedigree. It's a bit we hire that which we were ourselves and what we're comfortable with. So we really want to kind of ask the question, is that still relevant? So Jeremy, I thought we'd start by just talking about how you and I came up in education, right? We were both elementary school teachers. And for me, at least, what was the explicit goal of that job, of really the education reform movement at that time? I did Teach for America. It was college, 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 right? They
Yes.
told us in the TFA training to put our diplomas on the wall so everyone could see that's the goal of K-12 education. And then I worked at a nonprofit for many years after that, helping low-income kids get to college. That was the goal. You had succeeded in the K-12 system if your kids were going to get to college. Now, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and here's the thing. When I taught kindergarten in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, our class wasn't class 1, class 7. It was UVA class of 2021 because we were telling these 5-year-olds, you better get your butt to college. That was the entire
Exactly.
thing.
Right? And the whole like, no excuses charter movement came up in that mindset. And I think it's become pretty clear if you look at some of the data over the last decade or two that contract is fraying a little bit, right? It is no longer the case that college is for everyone. So let's just start with some data so you can first understand WTF is going on, right? First things first, the very large majority of Americans do not have a 4-year college degree, right? The latest census report, 2022, 38% of Americans age 25 and older have a traditional 4-year degree, a bachelor's degree or higher, right? It goes up
Wow.
a little bit, maybe around half if you add in associates or 2-year degrees, right? So that is America today, right? 60+% of Americans don't have a traditional 4-year degree. Now, you could say, okay, well, what about that subset that's, college age, 18 to 24? Are they going to college? And the truth is that rate has been decreasing. Most recent data, 39% of 18 to 24-year-olds are actually enrolled in college, undergrad or graduate
Mm.
programs. And
We
this is a
failed as
decline.
elementary school teachers, Omar. We didn't get them to college.
We did, or maybe they're just wising up, which
Ah,
we will get into. So the college enrollment rate for the college age population in America is hovering around 40%. It's declined steadily, and that is a significant decline from pre-COVID. So it is true that still a slight majority are going to college after they finish high school, but we know because of the dropout rates that they just don't persist at the level we'd like.
yeah.
And so what you see is 40% of the college age population actually being in college at any given time now.
Man.
So, so that's sort of like what's happening overall with college going. Now, you have to ask yourself, why is that the case? And is that a blip or a long term reality that's just, we just need to adjust to? But the reality is that college going is at a generational low, maybe even multiple generations. If you look back at the GI Bill and all the ways in which college helped create the middle class in this country, one of the driving factors clearly is cost, right?
Yes.
And so we all know that tuition has gone up more than pretty much any other good or service in our economy over the last few decades, like over 1,000%
Whoa.
since the 70s in real terms, in inflation adjusted terms. Um, but even just if you look at the last few decades, college costs have gone up on the orders of hundreds of percents, right? And that is true for both public and private schools. Um, and what you end up having is a situation where, at the very least, the sticker price of these colleges just seems like, on surface, uh, it's a non-starter for many young people, right? And I do want to differentiate sticker price versus actual price, because that often is not the price that actual college students are paying, right? But, you know, basically, if you look at the last 30-year trend for a typical public 4-year undergrad, the sticker price, again, adjusted for inflation, has gone from, and this is just for tuition, to say nothing of room and board, which also has gone up, from about $4,000 to almost $11,000. And for
Wow.
private schools, it's doubled, and is about 40,000 per year on average.
Yowza. We
So
got to get
just
those
to summarize,
529s filling up, Omar. Max it out, baby.
exactly. So several 100% climb in college tuition. Many students face high, not just sticker prices, but net prices, and are making that calculus, hey, with this debt burden I'm going to have, is it really worth it? Which puts the pressure even more aggressively on colleges to prove that they have that ROI. And we
Yeah.
can talk about whether they in fact still do.
Yeah. It really is that numerator versus the denominator, right? The denominator has gone crazy in terms of what you're going to pay to go to college. And the numerator is now under more attack than ever. Are you going to get those jobs like your joke alluded to back in the day? So, where should we start? Should we start on the top line or the bottom line? Where are things really crumbling in the college facade?
Well, I think it's clear in the data that young people and families are increasingly aware that maybe you don't need to go to college to get a great job. Not that that's the only goal, right? So I think maybe we should start with the larger question of what is college for, but maybe we
Yeah.
should even start
Yeah.
with who is it for, right?
Absolutely. So
So what are
let
your
me let
thoughts
me
on that?
speak to that a little bit, Omar, because there's been this interesting study that UCLA has done for probably 50 years at this point, where they ask incoming college freshmen, "Why are you going?" And dating back to the 70s, initial answers were to live a good life, to learn, to round myself out, all these really nice holistic things. But somewhere around the 80s and 90s, everything switched. And I was like, I'm here to get a job. I'm here to get a career, to pay off my student loans. And I kind of think in some ways, college never made that switch. The students, the buyers, they had a very clear focus. But if you look at the way the career centers are funded, where they're often the last department to get funding, the way that colleges spend money, it just seems like there's a big disconnect between what colleges believe they're for and what their students do. What do you see from your seat at UVA?
I think that's true. I think there's a lot of the old model that's happening, right? Because the people who are running these institutions and who are teaching the classes, et cetera, they benefited from that system. That's the system they know and love, right? But if you think about, like, who's really ready for that at age 17, 18, to go on this academic topical exploration of things that might interest them, that's not going to be everybody. In fact, you could argue that's serving the people who can afford college, really, right?
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing that colleges always go back to. They will say a couple things. One is, we're teaching critical thinking, right? It's the only way, it's the only place where you can really do that, right? They like to hide behind, which is, we don't really know what we're teaching. We don't really know if it has marketable, appreciable job skills, but hey, critical thinking is what we're in the business of, right? So that's one thing you'll hear a lot. The second thing you'll hear a lot, and this is actually still largely true, although this gap is shrinking, is that you can make a shit ton more money with a college degree, right? uh, in fact, a bachelor's degree as of 2022 can deliver an estimated $9.5 million in lifetime earnings over a 40-year career. And about 3.5 million of that is attributable to the degree itself.
Wow.
Relative
Huge.
to a high school degree only, significantly, that's millions more that you can make over the course of your lifetime, right? So it's an investment that, at least given our current data, still pays off, right? But there's significant opportunity costs, right? You're not working, you're not necessarily learning a real trade or skill if you think about traditional 4-year universities. And so the question is, the experience itself, is that for everyone? Assuming that that ROI is still there, which it's not going to be indefinitely for everyone at the same level, right? It is also true that college graduates right now, given this is 2024 data, have lower unemployment rates, right? But we are seeing a lot more companies decide, hey, you don't need a college degree to work here, right? Google, IBM, notably companies, many companies. In fact, I was looking on ZipRecruiter and saw recently that there were only about 14% of jobs required a bachelor's degree, right? And that's significantly down apparently from just a few years ago when it was 20-25% or even more. So, we'll get to what you can actually do about some of this, but employers aren't necessarily requiring that college degree anymore. Even knowledge worky tech companies where you would think that would be the case, because they want to know, do you have the skills and the orientation and the scrap to do the job, not necessarily did you just get this checkbox, right?
Right.
And remember that world-class research, which is often the real mission of many of these universities, right? Not all of them, but the research universities, world-class research is not necessarily the same thing as world-class teaching.
Yes.
What do you think,
And
Jeremy?
so here's my big question for you, Omar, which is we just got done speaking in our last episode about how AI is going to change the labor market forever. It's going to deprioritize technical skills, maybe reprioritize human skills. What do you think that has in store for the power of a college degree? Is that going to make it more important to get back to critical thinking and those human abilities? Or actually, who cares whether you went to college so long as you're ChatGPT certified?
I have an opinion on this, but it is a great question that I was going to ask you if you didn't ask me. So what do you think, man?
Beat you to the
You
punch.
go first. You go
Yeah,
first.
yeah. Well, my take is that I totally agree with you. I think, if you put yourself in the shoes of a recruiter, the reason why college was valuable in the first place, it was a signaling device, as economists would tell you. It was saying this person has been willing to work a little bit harder, go a little bit deeper in all these ways because they got into college in the first place and they got out of it with a degree.
Yes.
Therefore, we can
By the
assume,
way, Scott
yeah,
Galloway would say that's the primary function of colleges. They're massive HR departments, right?
sure,
They've
sure,
done the
yeah,
vetting, especially MBA
yeah.
programs. They've done the vetting for employers to say, okay, I can hire this person.
Yeah. But then let's think about what's happened in our move to democratize access to higher education. Remember, there was like a moment a decade or half ago where Obama got up there and said, I want every American to go to college for at least one semester, as if like one semester of college would somehow magically transform your life. And with everyone sort of getting into it, all of a sudden, whatever power that signal had in 1955 was no longer as prevalent. If you hadn't gone to some quote unquote elite school, how did we know whether you were actually a harder worker, more diligent, whatever, or you just got pushed into college by your family? And so I do think that as you think about what it's going to be like to be a recruiter in 2030, does that college degree even mean anything? Especially relative to the signal of like, look at this company that I built with AI. Look at how I use the power of AI and my storytelling skills to build out a whole new nonprofit. I wonder if that's going to be something where that signal gets kind of lost in the noise. But what's your take?
I agree with that. I also wonder, part of what you're making me question is this age-old debate of like the value of liberal arts education, right? And it's the point of college to get a job, right? And I think what we said earlier is like it is for a growing group of people, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many like high school students I've worked with over the years have been like, what I know about college is that you get that money, right? You get the degree, you get that money, right? And so like, but again, if that starts to fray, or you can make $100,000 a year by learning a trade or a skill, which you increasingly can, by the way, right? For for the average hourly wage for Gen Z workers in skilled trades has gone from less than $20 an hour up to nearly $27, $28 an hour now. That just in the last 5 years. So, there's a lot of work to be had for non-college graduates. That's really good work. And I also want to talk about entrepreneurship. But right, is that the goal of college? And I think what we're saying is for a small group of people who are ready for that academic exploration, who truly want to indulge in that, and who may not actually even have affordability challenges with respect to college, like it's a great experience. Right? That is a great experience for somebody who's ready for that. But what is the percentage of 18-year-olds who are ready for that? I think it's
Yeah.
not clearly not the 75, 80, 90% that we thought it was when we were coming up, right? It is probably more like 5 to 25%. And it certainly is way lower for men, for boys, than it is for women. Now, I also think everybody should do a gap year before they go to college, right? But I'm also very intrigued by models that start to blend these things, like Northeastern University, where you have to actually work throughout your
Right.
entire
That
4 years,
co-op
not
model. Yeah.
co-op, not like work study, but like
Yeah.
an actual job with an actual
Right.
employer that could
Right.
hire you
So
afterwards,
that's
and
what I
it's
was going to ask you,
integrated
Omar.
into the
Like,
curriculum.
if you imagine your own daughter at age 18, having just gone through a dozen years of regular K through 12 education, is she going to get more out of 4 years hanging around with people who are just like her in this little college bubble, or 4 years of being on the job, meeting all these different people, having real accountability and a focus on doing real things out there in the world? Because I think you could argue that maybe it's just the age that is magical, not necessarily the experience.
Yes, the age coupled with the structured freedom, let's call it, that comes with
Yeah.
college, right? Because otherwise it's just good luck in the real world, which is like hard even for a 22, 25-year-old. So what I would say is I want that for my daughter. By the way, we're kind of questioning the value of a college degree in this conversation so far, but when push came to shove, I started a college savings plan for both my kids, right?
Same here. Same here.
All right, so we're true believers here. Again, loyalist critique. But for me, college cannot just be about that, you know, walking through the ivied halls disconnected from reality. I think it's great to indulge in topics that you might find interesting that you might not have known anything about, right? It's got to be coupled with practical, hands on something, whether it's that Northeastern model of actually working while you're doing it, or figuring out how these things apply, or faculty being really challenged to figure out how marketable professional skills can be integrated into the curriculum, or, like you're actually taking entrepreneurship courses and building stuff while you're doing the liberal arts thing. I think you've got to pair those things now, or else it's going to become even more rapidly obsolete. One model that I think is actually interesting is we had a German au pair last year, right? And they have two tracks when you come out of high school. You can either go the university track, which is a very small subset of people. I don't actually know, but according to our au pair, it's a small subset. Or you can go the apprenticeship track, right? And in her case, she worked for like 7 years for a major international shipping company and was like managing 4 container ships and the logistics of where they would go in the world, and got really good at that right now. Then she decided not to take a full-time job there and do that. But which is more valuable, right? I mean, it's kind of up for debate.
Yeah, absolutely. Clearly, the numerator, sort of the upside of college in terms of what's the experience like, how does it predispose you to getting jobs or getting really well paid jobs, that's all under question. Let's talk a little bit about the denominator for a second. You mentioned at the outset, college has gotten ridiculously expensive. As someone who's inside the system, as someone who works with the system, do we think college needs to be that expensive? Is that just the cost of doing business in 2025? What's your take on?
There's so much great like research and articles about this. If you guys want to nerd out on this topic, there's a lot of interesting reasons for this. One thing that we're seeing with the one might say the attacks on higher ed is that colleges have not been super financially savvy, right? They have not necessarily been great stewards of their money. All of a sudden, some of this research funding dries up, and in the cases of some schools, it is really significant, right? It's hundreds of millions of dollars, but they don't know what to do, right? It's like existential. And so I wouldn't go so far as to say it's financial mismanagement, but I don't think anybody would say that most colleges have been really, really disciplined when it comes to that. There's all kinds of places where efficiencies can be gained, cuts can be made. I am not one of those people that thinks, oh, there's too much bloat and professional staff in higher ed, because I am one of those professional staff.
Ah,
I actually think what you need is more professional staff. You actually need better professional staff, and maybe fewer who do more jobs and are more capable of like raising the level of the professional staff. But that's a commonly cited reason for the increases in costs. But I think the answer to your question, Jeremy, goes back to what you were saying earlier. Like, they're kind of built for an old model that is, if you think about the school I work in, a top MBA program, it's really high costs, right? Pretty soon it might reach $200,000 to go through a two year
wow.
experience,
Wow.
and it's really high return, right? If you believe, and we still believe, that the lead MBA has market value, that's an investment that's actually worth it if you can get in.
Yeah.
What do we do on the back end? We're paying our faculty and even our staff way more than they would get at any other school except for the med school, right? Sometimes they're rivaling like the sports coaches for some of the highest paid people in the entire state. So I think what you have in many cases is a high cost model that is still high ROI. Again, what we're talking about is, if that fundamental contract starts to break, starts to fray, are people going to just see it for what it is and say, I can get these skills elsewhere. I can make myself upwardly mobile and employable elsewhere. And I don't need to do that. Right. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that like one thing I've learned across every organization type, whether it's an elementary school, a giant tech company, a nonprofit, is organizations always grow bigger over time unless they're forced to go out of business. And that's just sort of that natural snowball effect of people hire more people who hire more people. So I don't necessarily blame higher ed for
Yeah,
that
we have a
natural.
need.
Yeah.
Instead of
Yeah.
like, let's figure out how to do that need, the easiest answer is always
Yeah.
like, we need a new person.
Exactly, exactly, and that's not limited to higher ed. That being said, let me play devil's advocate. Let me throw out a completely different model that might get at some of the things you were talking about that you would want for your own daughter, which is, what if at 18 we sent people off to the workforce into internships or apprenticeships, but then they had like a faculty advisor who would bring them together for the social piece, who provide the sort of tutorship and the mentorship that a really great sort of entry level person gets. And it's almost like a college that travels with the student and it's in context. And what's really key here is not just sort of how exciting it could be for the student, but how low in cost that would be. You could have like one, professor or one advisor serving 25, 30 students, as opposed to this massive bureaucracy that's sort of spread across thousands and thousands. Is there a way that we could almost take college back to its fundamental, original goal of like trying to transition people into adulthood, transition people into the workforce without all the layers of crud that have been built up over centuries and centuries?
It's really interesting. By the way, I mentioned gap years earlier. I also think we should mandate national service. That would be a great thing to
Mm.
do during
Yeah.
that time period. But that's really interesting. I mean, didn't Minerva, it wasn't that sort of what Minerva was trying to do?
Yeah. It seems like you almost have to start from scratch because if you're a president at UVA or University of Michigan or anywhere, who's going to come in and say, we need to slash our cost by 80%? No one's going to be able to do that. Not on this planet.
Yeah, totally. This is the thing about universities, right? Especially those with, by the way, roughly one university somewhere in the US is closing every week, right? So we're speaking about universities writ large. We have to be careful to actually segment those, because those at the top are doing still really well, but not everyone is, right? So, but I think it sort of goes back to this question of, what is the fundamental value, and does that value accrue to everyone? One other problem is the group that these colleges are serving. Why isn't Swarthmore or Haverford expanding their ranks to,
Yes.
apparently tripling their class sizes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Well, I
just
know that like
seeing that as
Scott
part of their
Galloway's whole
social mission.
critique is like all these brands, and that's what they really are, is brands, luxury brands, are basically becoming like Hermes purses, where I don't even know if Hermes makes purses, but anyway, you get the idea. They're basically treating it like this long-term play of let's squeeze every last drop of value out of this historic brand, as opposed to we are a force for good in society. We will democratize access to opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I always think about that one of those early Malcolm Gladwell revisionist history episodes where, he's telling people don't go to what was the school in Maine?
Bowden, yeah.
Don't go to Bowdoin, send your kids to Vassar because Bowdoin has really nice dining halls and Vassar is investing in scholarships for low income kids and they're eating really shitty food, right?
Yeah.
So that social mission, I think, is important, but the brand is the real issue, right? It's the classic in business. We talk about the innovator's dilemma, right? That's the challenge that these universities have. What incentive do you have to change your own model when you've got so much brand equity, and just like in other sectors of the economy, what you need is some outside disruptors. You need some agitators. Now, you could argue that what Trump is doing is some of that. I don't know that he's doing that in the best way, but that is a threat that is forcing people to think seriously about how are we managing this enterprise. Same thing goes for adjustments in the job market. That could be a somewhat existential threat. But it's an interesting prompt, Jeremy, of like, if you could design a system from scratch, what would you actually do? And would that be an appropriate challenge to the current system?
Yeah. Now
I
this is
think your
interesting
model is really
because
interesting. I don't know if
yeah,
faculty could do that. And that's one of the
right, right.
challenges I see is that and why I think we should have better and more professional staff, because in a lot of these institutions, you have faculty who are elevated into these leadership roles, and
Right.
some of them are really good at that, right?
And they're
But if
also
you think
focused on
about
like publishing articles versus like student service.
research, or they're like experts often in their niche area, but just
Yeah.
because you are an expert in Shakespeare or Chaucer or weighted average cost of capital doesn't necessarily mean that you can lead an enterprise. And these are big enterprises. They employ thousands, if not tens of thousands of people in some cases. They have their own police force. They have, right, their own health system. These are like little cities. And in
Yeah.
parts of this country, like in the South, they are some of the biggest, if not the biggest employers, right?
Sure.
And not to mention sports teams, athletic programs that they're running, right? So, like, I think this is one of the challenges. I'm not going to call it a problem, but a challenge of the current higher ed system is, let's just put people who are good at their individual jobs into these leadership roles without necessarily being leaders or having done it. And that isn't, it takes a real purple squirrel to be able to do that well in these environments, because these are really big institutions.
Yeah. And I do think, to bring it completely full circle, and then we'll get into the solutions for our audience out there. You talked at the beginning about the power of the certificate. That dad joke of the employer who doesn't care about college theoretically, but still wants to see that diploma on the wall. And so then the question becomes, will there ever be disruption in the higher ed space if all these boot camps have come in and all these other alternative players have come in? But at the end of the day, if you don't have that BA or BS next to your name, you're not considered really a member of the intellectual elite in this country who has access to the best opportunities. So will someone ever break that cartel? That's my question for you.
I think it's changing. I think it's changing. We see in the numbers that it still has positive ROI. But what it's going to take, I think, is many more employers, perhaps the majority of employers, saying, we don't need this. Now, that's hard. That's like asking Congress to reform itself, because the people
Good luck.
who are in these leadership roles right now in companies making these decisions are usually college grads who've gone through that process. But over time, will that start to happen as we have better ways of showing what you can do, not just telling it in the form of a college diploma? Yeah, I think that'll happen.
Okay, now we've thoroughly confused and scared people. It is time for WTF Should You Do About It? The moment in the show when we give you real advice on how to solve all these existential challenges. So, Omar, imagine this. You are either 18 years old yourself, or you're the parent of an 18-year-old who's listening right now. Given all the challenges we just illustrated, what advice would you have for that person about how to make the college go or no go decision.
Well, I wanted to share the three things that the president of Wesleyan actually said college is for. So Michael Roth has been out there talking about this. And I think if you think about these three things as what college is for, yes, but actually extend them into what is that period in one's life for, right? Not necessarily college. Then it provides perhaps a blueprint for how could you get this somewhere else, right? Could you get it somewhere else? Or for you is the answer to that college, right? And by the way, this is not just true for a 17 or 18-year-old thinking about undergrad, or if you're a parent trying to help your kid through that process, or whether you should go back to school or get a graduate degree or an MBA. It's true for anybody who's thinking about education writ large, and also this bucket of upskilling. But his three reasons that college matters, right? What college is for is one, discovering what you love to do, right? Which he would say you can uniquely do on a college campus where you get to sample from lots of different things, right? Uncovering your
Yeah.
true passions and interests, engaging with all these different disciplines, discovering what really motivates you, interests you. Second is a bit of a laboratory to get really good at that, right? And yes, part of that is critical thinking, right? Maybe creativity, but you have a number of years to just say, okay, that's my thing. I want to be around some experts in it, and I'm going to go deep on that. Is that for everybody? Does everybody achieve that kind of clarity on a college campus? I don't know. And then the third thing is, and here's where I think colleges often fail and where the value prop is really starting to erode, is figuring out how to turn that thing that you've realized you're good at and you've had the ability to hone over a few years, how to turn that into a job,
Mm.
right? So, and that requires gaining an understanding of the world and yourself. And to your point, Jeremy, maybe having a bit of a more of a handholdy guide to how to make that transition. Because here's the big issue with that. You don't know anything about the world when you're 21 or 22, right? How are you supposed to know whether that thing you're interested in is actually an employable thing? So I wanted to just start with those three things because I think that they're actually a good frame for what you need to be thinking about when you're up and coming in the world, right? But the question that you have to critically ask, and everybody's got a different decision to make, is can I get those disproportionately, uniquely, optimally on a college campus relative to all the other things we could do now? All these platforms where you can upskill, all the ways in which you can truly dabble and learn, right? I mean, you can learn anything now from the combination of Coursera, YouTube, and Upwork, right? Or whatever, and AI, right? So I think, but again, discovering what you love to do, getting really good at that, and then figuring out how to turn that into a job. If that's the point of college, does it require a college?
Yeah, I love that. And I think I have to really give the president props there because it would have been easy to, again, hide behind the idea of critical thinking, the liberal arts, rounding out your knowledge. And he brought it back to the things that students and their families really care about, which is what's that glide path into adulthood. That being said, I wonder about that first piece, figuring out what you're really good at and what you're excited about. Because I think about the fact that, like, again, because college comes from this ancient tradition, dating back to like Oxford and Cambridge, of exposure to the things that like ministers would have to know 500 years ago, like Latin, Greek, classics, all that good stuff.
Mhm.
I wonder if like the buffet of options in terms of departments and courses actually reflects the world. Like you might say, I love philosophy, I love political science, but is there actually a career path in those realms short of going into academia yourself? And so, like,
So do you think
I,
every
I
college should
yeah,
be a career or technical education school, right? We should just slash all the humanities. What was your major, Jeremy?
yeah, I know. I'm like really going after my own training here. Well, I guess what I'm getting at is that I feel like, when you and I worked at LinkedIn, there was that famous Newsweek cover before Newsweek became like an online magazine that said, "Is college worth it?" I think it was the first time
Yeah,
it was
we
so
showed that
broadly
to Reid
asked in
Hoffman.
society.
Yeah.
Exactly. And basically, what I was getting at, there was a big phenomenon at the time of all these liberal arts grads who were working at Starbucks and had no clue. And I was like, if you were coming out of college with six figures of debt and no direction, no sense of how to connect that back to the workforce, something has gone wrong. And so I think that's where I question, is the way college is set up today actually fulfilling the promise that you alluded to in the president's sort of 3 points? Or does it have to reform in order to give people a really valid sense of what's available to them.
Yeah. And I think your idea of like a faculty advisor throughout this period of navigating the beginning of your adult life is an interesting one. Maybe the tweak would be you need an actual career advisor, right? You need a little bit of you need like a combination of like a life coach and a faculty member or somebody who can like who actually has an expertise in a specific thing that you can at least be pointed to, or somebody to curate like go learn this online, right? And here's the best of, and a little bit of that career advisor function. Now, if that like that combination, I think could really help people land in the world. But the other argument you're making, Jeremy, is like we need to resource and career centers on college campuses because they're under resourced and the ratios suck. They're like, if
Yeah.
you want to come, if you want to come make an appointment with us, that's great. But otherwise, we can't really we can't really handle you, right? We need a lot
Right.
more of them, and
Right.
we need a lot more who have worked in industry.
Let's come back to this fundamental question. Again, the
Yeah.
student or the parent trying to decide about college. So I love the framing that you set up. Now, here's the way that it feels like it's traditionally played out. We say all three things that you mentioned are awesome. We want that. And we trust that somewhere in the black box of those 4 years, all those things will happen. And out will come shiny Omar or shiny Jeremy ready to hit the road to a great career. But is it now incumbent upon us as both students and parents to interrogate that black box to try to understand and control what's happening in those 4 years? Or do we still just have faith that the system will provide?
Well, I can tell you, we've heard stories of parents coming to career center meetings with their kids,
Yes.
right? What do you think? Do you think we should just trust?
Yeah. Well, it's so tricky because here I am, the super type A guy sitting out in Silicon Valley, and I could totally see me talking to my own daughters at age 17. We'll pay for college. We've saved up the money, but I want to have a plan of action. What are your OKRs? What are your
Totally.
KPIs? And then I feel so hypocritical saying that because my parents didn't do that to me. And again, I feel like you would lose a little bit of that magic experience. So what I'm trying to reconcile in my head is how do you make a really thoughtful, very expensive decision with such imperfect information?
But that's how we started the episode. Remember how crazy expensive it has gotten. That was not actually true for us. It was starting to become true. This is really just the last couple decades when the cost soars that much, you do have to critically ask these questions. And I think, as I said earlier, when my kid goes to college, if she goes to college, I'm going to require some goals. I'm going to require that she do other things too, like start a business while she's in school, right? And figure out how the classes actually align to that stuff. And I think that's appropriate as the customer, as the paying customer here, right? And I think like that's the mindset that like schools still aren't quite in. They know the students and actually their parents are the customers, but we know from working in corporate America what it means to really have truly great customer service and build a business around a customer. There's a lot of things that exist now in higher ed that aren't necessarily putting those students or those customers at the center, but rather protecting the status quo. And so like what would it look like if we really put students at the center? I think it's appropriate for parents to ask that question. I would see my role not just as interrogating that, but actually really trying to round that out for my own family, right? Like I think
Yeah.
I'm going to have to play that role of saying, okay, are you meeting with the career center? Have you thought about an internship? Like I had no idea what to do when I was in college. I went to this great school, right? But no one told me go do these things. I was like, maybe I should get an internship. I went to go work at TGI Fridays my first summer. And then I was like
I worked at
flipping through
Walgreens.
Walgreens, right? And I
Yep.
was flipping through and by the way, and also at a summer camp. So that was like my 2 shifts. And then like 2 weeks into my summer, I was like, I should like see what other alumni exist out there. And at the time we didn't have LinkedIn. So I was flipping through a physical alumni book
It's like a
and I
binder
found
of
somebody.
alumni, right?
It was this huge ass binder. And I found somebody who worked at AOL, which look it up, boys and girls. It used to be a really popular company. It was hot shit back in the day. And I ended up getting an internship at AOL in the marketing department. And I worked there for all 3 summers, and then also in all the winter breaks, right? So I had like
Yeah.
a real corporate internship, but it was totally happenstance because I was
Yeah.
like, I don't know, maybe I should get one, right? So
Yeah.
who's telling you
And
that?
also,
I
it's
think
still incumbent upon you to light the spark. Like you had to
that's
be the
what
one to get the binder and do the outreach.
yeah, so you still have to do that, kids. So Jeremy, we built a whole startup business based on, and you're still running it, based on how to do an off-campus search, which is actually the reality of most job searches,
That's
right? For the
right.
rest of your career. So
Yeah.
learn it now and then ask yourself, is college going to help me do that? And really, do you want to be in that exploratory period of your life? Is that the best way for you to sample all of the richness of life that's out there? But before you make that decision, take a gap year, serve somebody, serve your country, be of value, be of service, understand things that are out there, get outside your own community or bubble, right? That's the value of national service. That's the value Teach for America really actually is. And programs like that is they put the wealthy elite into totally different environments, right? And get you viscerally in touch with some of the issues that real people are facing, right? Take that time to do that. And then while you're in college, if you decide that's for you, work, work, work the whole time, right? The college that my wife went to, really interesting model where nobody leaves with any debt, right?
Oh,
You leave debt free. You don't have to pay tuition, but everybody works the entire time. And
wow.
so literally the college itself is built on student workers, but they're also obviously students. The last thing I will say about what you can do is entrepreneurship. So
Yeah.
yes, I run the country's largest or second largest entrepreneurship center affiliated with the university. But I have to say, whether or not you're in school, this is a really viable path for everybody. And you have more arrows in your quiver, more birds in your hand, as we talked about in the last episode, than you think. At any age, anybody can be an entrepreneur. And I would argue that having something tangible and real that you are trying to build and put into the world, it could be the stupidest thing to meet your little needs with your friends, right? Small group, narrow segment. But if you are trying to color in your education, whether it's in K-12 or in college with real hands-on applications, it's going to be so much more useful to you. Plus, you learn by doing all of the different functions of business, all the things that success actually requires in the real world because you're actually doing it. And for me, this is the big disconnect with college, right? Jeremy, do you remember probably 10 years ago when we almost wrote our first book, not about LinkedIn, but on soft skills for career
Right.
starters, right?
Yes.
People have now realized this. But for me, that was the big disconnect is I knew a lot of things about a few narrow topics, but I wasn't really prepared to succeed in the real world. And the only way that you can really prepare yourself for that is by doing it, by being in it.
Yeah.
So how do you bring in as many elements of real world application into your education? That's true for K-12 and some of the directions it needs to go in as well as higher ed. So be intentional about it if you do that. And by the way, you can do a lot of that without having to go to college. I'm
Absolutely.
prepared to be fired now by my employer.
Well, I think that's the perfect note to end on, which is yes, things are confusing now, and the decision is probably tougher than ever. And yet, there are really good ways to make sense of it and to choose the path that's right for you. Okay, that is WTF is up, and that is WTF you should do about it. Omar, if folks want to follow us, join the conversation, listen to the next episode, where do they go next?
Check us out on all the podcast apps. We're excited to bring you our next episode next week, all about WTF is up with parenting in the age of AI.
Hey, cannot
Juicy.
wait. Until then, that is WTF is up.